Part 2 of The Celestial Railroad by Nathaniel Hawthorne. The spot where we had now paused is the same that our friend Bunyan, a truthful man, but infected with many fantastic notions, has designated, in terms plainer than I like to repeat, as the mouth of the infernal region. This, however, must be a mistake, inasmuch as Mr. Smooth-it-away, while we remained in the smoky and lurid cavern, took occasion to prove that Tophet was not even a metaphorical existence. The place, he assured us, is no other than the crater of a half-extinct volcano, in which the directors had caused forges to be set up for the manufacture of railroad iron. Hence also is obtained a plentiful supply of fuel for the use of the engines. Whoever had gazed into the dismal obscurity of the broad caravan mouth, whence ever and anon darted huge tongues of dusky flame, and had seen the strange, half-shaped monsters and visions of faces horribly grotesque, into which the smoke seemed to wreathe itself, and had heard the awful murmurs and shrieks and deep shuddering whispers of the blast, sometimes forming themselves into words almost articulate, would have seized upon Mr. Smooth-it-away's comfortable explanation as greedily as we did. The inhabitants of the cavern, moreover, were unlovely personages, dark, smoke-begrimed, generally deformed, with misshapen feet, and a glow of dusky redness in their eyes, as if their hearts had caught fire and were blazing out of the upper windows. It struck me as a peculiarity that the laborers at the forge and those who brought fuel to the engine, when they began to draw short breath, positively emitted smoke from their mouths and nostrils. Among the idlers about the train, most of whom were puffing cigars which they had lighted at the flame of the crater, I was perplexed to notice several who, in my certain knowledge, had hitherto set forth by railroad for the celestial city. They looked dark, wild, and smoky, with a singular resemblance, indeed, to the native inhabitants, like whom, also, they had a disagreeable propensity to ill-natured jibes and sneers, the habit of which had wrought a settled contortion of their visages. Having been on speaking terms with one of these persons, an indolent, good-for-nothing fellow, who went by the name of Take It Easy, I called him and inquired what was the business there. "Did you not start," said I, "for the celestial city?" "That's a fact," said Mr. Take It Easy, carelessly puffing some smoke in my eyes. "But I heard some bad accounts that I never took pains to climb the hill on which the city stands. No business doing, no fun going on, nothing to drink, and no smoking allowed, and a thrumming of church music from morning till night. I would not stay in such a place if they offered me house, room, and living free." "But my good Mr. Take It Easy," cried I, "why take up your residence here, of all places in the world?" "Oh," said the loafer with a grin, "it's very warm hereabouts, and I meet with plenty of old acquaintances, and altogether the place suits me. I hope to see you back again some day soon. A pleasant journey to you." While he was speaking, the bell of the engine rang, and we dashed away after dropping a few passengers, but received no new ones. Rattling onward through the valley, we were dazzled with the fiercely gleaming gas lamps as before, but sometimes in the dark of intense brightness, grim faces that bore the aspect and expression of individual sins or evil passions seemed to thrust themselves through the veil of light, glaring upon us, and stretching forth a great dusky hand, as if to impede our progress. I almost thought that they were my own sins that appalled me there. These were freaks of imagination, nothing more certainly, mere delusions which I ought to be heartily ashamed of. But all through the dark valley I was tormented and pestered and dolefully bewildered with the same kind of waking dreams. The mephitic gases of that region intoxicated the brain. As the light of natural day, however, began to struggle with the glow of the lantern, these vain imaginations lost their vividness and finally vanished with the first ray of sunshine that greeted our escape from the valley of the shadow of death. Ere we had gone a mile beyond it, I could well nigh have taken my oath that this whole gloomy passage was a dream. At the end of the valley, as John Bunyan mentions, is a cavern where in his days dwelt two cruel giants, Pope and Pagan, who had strewn the ground about their residence with the bones of slaughtered pilgrims. These vile old troglodytes are no longer there, but into their deserted cave another terrible giant has thrust himself, and makes it his business to seize upon honest travelers and fatten them for his table with plentiful meals of smoke, mist, moonshine, raw potatoes, and sawdust. He is a German by birth and is called Giant Transcendentalist. But as to his form, his features, his substance, and his nature generally, it is the chief peculiarity of this huge miscreant that neither he for himself nor anybody for him has ever been able to describe them. As we rushed by the cavern's mouth, we caught a hasty glimpse of him, looking somewhat like an ill-proportioned figure, but considerably more like a heap of fog and duskiness. He shouted after us, but in so strange a phraseology that we knew not what he meant, nor whether to be encouraged or affrighted. It was late in the day when the train thundered into the ancient city of Vanity, where Vanity Fair is still at the height of prosperity and exhibits an epitome of whatever is brilliant, gay, and fascinating beneath the sun. As I proposed to make a considerable stay here, it gratified me to learn that there was no longer the want of harmony between the townspeople and pilgrims, which impelled the former to such lamentably mistaken measures as the persecution of Christian and the fiery martyrdom of faithful. On the contrary, as the new railroad brings with it great trade and a constant influx of strangers, the Lord of Vanity Fair is its chief patron, and the capitalists of the city are among the largest stockholders. Many passengers stop to take their pleasure or make their profit in the fair, instead of going onward to the celestial city. Indeed, such is the charms of the place that people often affirm it to be the true and only heaven, stoutly contending that there is no other, that those who seek further are mere dreamers, and that, if the fabled brightness of the celestial city lay but a bare mile beyond the gates of vanity, then they would not be fools enough to go thither. Without subscribing to these perhaps exaggerated encomiums, I can truly say that my abode in the city was mainly agreeable, and my intercourse with the inhabitants productive of much amusement and instruction. Being naturally of a serious turn, my attention was directed to the solid advantages derivable from a residence here, rather than to the effervescent pleasures which are the grand object with too many visitants. The Christian reader, if he have had no accounts of the city later than Bunyan's time, will be surprised to hear that almost every street has its church, and that the reverend clergy are nowhere held in higher respect than at Vanity Fair. And well do they deserve such honorable estimation, for the maxims of wisdom and virtue which fall from their lips come from as deep a spiritual source and tend to as lofty a religious aim as those of the sagest philosophers of old. In justification of this high praise, I need only mention the names of the Reverend Mr. Shallow Deep and the Reverend Mr. Stumble at Truth, that fine old clerical character, the Reverend Mr. This Today, who expects shortly to resign his pulpit to the Reverend Mr. That tomorrow, together with the Reverend Mr. Bewilderment and the Reverend Mr. Clog the Spirit, and at last, and greatest, the Reverend Dr. Wind of Doctrine. The labors of these eminent divines are aided by those of innumerable lecturers who diffuse such a various profundity in all subjects of human or celestial science that any man may acquire an omnigenous erudition without the trouble of even learning to read. Thus, literature is etherealized by assuming for its medium the human voice, and knowledge depositing all its heavier particles, except doubtless its gold, becomes exhaled into the sound, which forthwith steals into the ever open ear of the community. These ingenious methods constitute a sort of machinery by which thought and study are done to every person's hand without his putting himself to the slightest inconvenience in the matter. There is another species of machine for the wholesale manufacture of individual morality. This excellent result is effected by societies for all manner of virtuous purposes, with which a man has merely to connect himself, throwing, as it were, his quota of virtue into the common stock, and the president and directors will take care that the aggregate amount be well applied. All these and other wonderful improvements in ethics, religion, and literature being made plain to my comprehension by the ingenious Mr. Smooth It Away, inspired me with a vast admiration of Vanity Fair. It would fill a volume in an age of pamphlets were I to record all my observations in this great capital of human business and pleasure. There was an unlimited range of society, the powerful, the wise, the witty, and the famous in every walk of life, princes, presidents, poets, generals, artists, actors, and philanthropists, all making their own market at the fair and deeming no price too exorbitant for such commodities as hit their fancy. It was well worth one's while, even if he had no idea of buying or selling, to loiter through the bazaars and observe the various sorts of traffic that were going forward. Some of the purchasers, I thought, made very foolish bargains. For instance, a young man having inherited a splendid fortune laid out a considerable portion of it in the purchase of diseases, and finally spent all the rest for a heavy lot of repentance and a suit of rags. A very pretty girl bartered a heart as clear as crystal, and which seemed her most valuable possession, for another jewel of the same kind, but so worn and defaced as to be utterly worthless. In one shop there was a great many crowns of laurel and myrtle, which soldiers, authors, statesmen, and various other people pressed eagerly to buy. Some purchased these paltry wreaths with their own lives, others by a toilsome servitude of years, and many sacrificed whatever was most valuable, yet finally slunk away without the crown. There was a sort of stock or script called conscience, which seemed to be in great demand and would purchase almost anything. Indeed, few rich commodities were to be obtained without paying a heavy sum in this particular stock, and a man's business was seldom very lucrative unless he knew precisely when and how to throw his hoard of conscience into the market. Yet, as this stock was the only thing of permanent value, whoever parted with it was sure to find himself a loser in the long run. Several of the speculations were of a questionable character. Occasionally, a member of Congress recruited his pocket by the sale of his constituents, and I was assured that public officers had often sold their country at very moderate prices. Thousands sold their happiness for a whim. Gilded chains were in great demand and purchased with almost any sacrifice. In truth, those who desired, according to the old adage, to sell anything valuable for a song might find customers all over the fair, and there were innumerable messes of pottage piping hot for such as chose to buy them with their birthrights. A few articles, however, could not be found genuine at Vanity Fair. If a customer wished to renew his stock of youth, the dealer offered a set of false teeth and an auburn wig. If he demanded peace of mind, they recommended opium or a brandy bottle. Tracts of land and golden mansions situated in the celestial city were often exchanged at very disadvantageous rates for a few years' lease of small, dismal, inconvenient tenements in Vanity Fair. Prince Beelzebub himself took great interest in this sort of traffic and sometimes condescended to meddle with the smaller matters. I once had the pleasure to see him bargaining with a miser for his soul, which, After much ingenious skirmishing on both sides, His Highness succeeded in obtaining at about the value of 6 pence. The prince remarked with a smile that he was a loser by the transaction. Day after day, as I walked the streets of Vanity, my manners and deportments became more and more like those of the inhabitants. The place began to seem like home. The idea of pursuing my travels to the celestial city was almost obliterated from my mind. I was reminded of it, however, by the sight of the same pair of simple pilgrims at whom we had laughed so heartily when Apollyon puffed smoke and steam into their faces at the commencement of our journey. There they stood amidst the densest bustle of Vanity, the dealers offering them their purple and fine linen and jewels, the men of wit and humor jibing at them, a pair of buxom ladies ogling them askance, while the benevolent Mr. Smooth It Away whispered some of his wisdom at their elbows and pointed to a newly erected temple. But there were these worthy simpletons, making the scene look wild and monstrous merely by their sturdy repudiation of all part in its business or pleasures. One of them, his name was Stick to the Right, perceived in my face, I suppose, a species of sympathy and almost admiration, which, to my own great surprise, I could not help feeling for this pragmatic couple. It prompted him to address me. "Sir," inquired he, with a sad yet mild and kindly voice, "do you call yourself a pilgrim?" And I think we'll pause here and we'll continue with the story in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys, as Tigger says. Ta-ta for now.